Remember, don't get stuck with another sticker company. Stick with StickerYeti.com for all of your sticker needs and much, much more. Sticker Yeti is the place for all of your needs when it comes to stickers. Check them out today.
Welcome to the Keeping the Nostalgia Alive show. This is going to be our music edition. You can listen to all of our programs at Keeping the Nostalgia Alive. That's all one word, keepingthenostalgiaalive.podbean.com. And also go to YouTube and check out our YouTube channel. This interview is going to be on our YouTube channel. Just search Keeping the Nostalgia Alive show and you'll find us. As you can see with us is Nick Feldman from Wang Chung. Nick, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to help keep the nostalgia alive and talk about your music career.
Yes, my pleasure. Good to be here. I like the backdrop you've got there.
Yeah, I've got, but the little guy behind me there, that's Coach Bob Knight. He's a pretty famous basketball coach here in the United States. And then you can see a couple CDs I got back there framed. Those were from Bang Tango. So, but most of my stuff is basketball related, but I've kind of branched out to music and entertainment, stuff like that. Just, I think it's based upon me wanting to know more about what I was into when I was a kid, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, I understand that. It's so interesting because I've been watching, I like basketball, but I don't pretend to know very much about it. But I've been watching The Last Dance, which is on Netflix, and
right,
it's
Michael
real kind of education and really good show. I totally recommend it. So yeah. I'm almost through it, but it's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yes, it is. But I love doing my entertainment shows, though. It's a lot of stuff like, I like to keep the nostalgia life from when I was a kid. And a lot of this stuff is questions that I want to know, but people enjoy the interviews. Tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised and your family, and what was the first instrument that you actually picked up and started playing or were interested in playing?
Well, I was born in London. I always loved music. I mean, the Beatles were kind of what really got me going. I remember sitting next door with at my friend's house and watching the Beatles' first appearance on TV over here in the UK. And their hair appeared to be very long. I mean, it actually, by these standards, today's standards, is not very long. And I remember that my friend's dad, being completely outraged at how they looked, and it was sort of completely riveting and exciting to watch this thing called the Beatles, and they clearly seemed to be upsetting people who it seemed to me to be pretty cool to upset. So that was the kind of beginning of my obsession with popular music, and then I followed the Beatles through and absolutely loved them. My first, I was really kind of rebellious. My brother and sister and myself were offered piano lessons by my parents, and of course, me being the sort of twit that I am, I refused to have them, and the other two took them. But of course, it's funny how life goes. I was the one who went into music properly, and they didn't. But my first proper instrument was this terrible, really cheap acoustic guitar I got when I was about 15, and I never learned how to play it. It sort of defied tuning. This guitar, it was really, really bad. But I used to mess around on it. And then I remember one day when I was maybe about 17, I suddenly realized maybe you can play a little bit, And then I started to jam with a friend of mine I was at school with, a guy called Pete. And he actually knew how to play guitar and knew a few chords and stuff. So he taught me some basic stuff. And then we used to have these really creative, kind of extemporaneous jams together, quite sort of out there, quite left field stuff, and really exploratory. And then we got a band together with John Moss from Culture Club. We went to the same school. He lived over the road from me, and so he became our drummer. And so it was me on guitar, my friend on guitar, John on drums, and we had various bass players. And we just used to jam and stuff, and I was starting to write songs. And that's how it all started, It was really creative, very free and creative and exploratory and experimental. It was really good.
Did you, being a little bit of rebellious, and because your dad didn't like the Beatles, but did you really enjoy the music?
Oh no, I love the music. It was thrilling to me, absolutely thrilling. It wasn't my dad; it was my friend's dad.
Okay, sorry.
My dad, my parents actually were pretty sort of accepting of it, and they were down with what was going on. Obviously, not to my intense levels, but they were pretty receptive. No, I love the music and still do. I think the Beatles are just.
How far do you live from where you were born and raised, where you're at today?
Oh, today I live in Wimbledon, so that's close to where the tennis used to be played. not this year, but I was brought up in sort of northwest London. I'm now in southwest London. I lived in a place called Camden for a long time, Camden Town, which my son lives there at the moment. That's a lot of small venues and very, very creative area for music, for rock music, for all different types of stuff. So, but no, I really like it out here because in Wimbledon, to me, being a sort of urban type guy, living out here in Wimbledon feels like the country, even though it isn't.
What's going on in the world today with the pandemic? What does that do to a musician? What does how do you collaborate with other people? Is it through Zoom like we're doing today, or what has it done to a musician's lifestyle?
Well, I mean, everyone's different. It's there's, because you're more sort of housebound, I suppose. And you've maybe got more time to do things that you might not normally have the time to do. So I've had that bit more time to write, and sit at home and write. So I've been doing a lot of that. Jack and I have collaborated. Jack from Wang Chung, we collaborated over. Thank God for the internet, because we can do things like Zoom, or we can send things over the internet to each other, bits of music and stuff. So we've created various things together over the internet. We've done a few live virtual shows and things like that. So yeah, it's obviously not the same as going out and playing to a live audience. That there's a real visceral thrill about doing that. And also, with the internet, there's a sort of latency problem. So if you want to play in time with someone else, the internet slightly delays it. Those small increments are really crucial in getting the right feel. So it's, at the moment, it's pretty hard to actually play live with someone in real time, if you know what I mean. But, we've sent stuff to each other and played along with that, if you know what I mean, and then edited the two together. So it sort of looks like it's real, but it's almost real.
How difficult was it to do the remix of Everybody Have Fun Tonight? I mean, it looks like, was there a lot of time involved? It looks like it's just fresh off of MTV, of how the MTV days used to be. How difficult was that to put together? Of course, I'm talking about Everybody Be Safe Tonight, which everybody please plug. Please go to iTunes and buy, please, because it's absolutely astounding. Outstanding.
Thank you. It was actually, it could have been harder. We used some of the original, about, 10 years ago or so, we re-recorded an exact replica of Everybody Have Fun Tonight, which we used that live as well, bits of it. And we also sync it out to TV shows, movies, commercials and stuff like that, because it sounds exactly the same, but it's just a re-recorder. We control the master. So that was a kind of smart move on our part to control, our old hits, but with owning the master ourselves. So we used a lot of those elements for this re-record. Jack re-sung the lead vocal and sang it really well, and then through I sang my bits, the rip it ups and the choruses and the low voice and everything. And I sort of recorded it on my iPhone and sent it over, emailed him all my vocals, it's amazing, what you can do. And then Valerie Day from Nu Shooz, she was up for a collaboration, so she sang her way through the song, and we used quite a lot of what she did, and then Jack had all the parts in his studio, so he put it all together. All the ingredients are there. He baked the cake, and there it was, and it turned out really, really well, and people seem to love it, and it's a good message, I suppose it was a little doodly idea that I had. I was just singing it along on a radio. I did a guest DJ slot on Sirius XM, and I just sang it as a little ad lib, and then Greg Ross of Back to the Basement heard it and thought, that's a good idea. Why don't you do it properly? So then I suggested it to Jack, and Jack was like, yeah, okay. And so he got to work, and there it was.
It's very interesting. You hear a lot of singers who are back in the 80s, 60s, 70s, and their voice just hasn't stood the test of time. Not saying anything against their music, but your guys' music and voices have stood that test of time. And of course, Valerie's was fantastic, because you see a lot of these guys who are a little bit older, and age gets to your voice.
Certainly does. Yeah, I mean, we've had to, a couple of the songs, we've had to lower the key of the tracks when we do them live these days. But, Jack just nailed it. I mean, he nailed it. I don't know, it just felt, all the stars aligned, and he just nailed it absolutely. In a couple of takes, he was very, and I wasn't there. He did it, at his place. And I was delighted. I thought he was just going to maybe change a few lines, but he just went for the whole thing, and it turned out so great. I was delighted, and then that inspired me to do all my bits. So his voice in some ways has changed, but in other ways it's great, So I think it's doing long shows, for example. I think you have to be careful of the stamina side of things. You have to pace yourself right and get breaks and breathers in the right places. But yeah, he's great.
How far do you live from Jack?
Well, Jack lives out of town. He lives in a place called Canterbury. So there's now really good train links to get there. It's about an hour on the train or so. But I have to go across London to get the train. So it's probably an hour and a half to get there for me. But, it's all pretty accessible.
I'm assuming that your relationship with Jack is almost like a marriage or brother and sister type stuff. How have you guys been able to maintain your friendship and relationship by being together so long?
Well, by taking a lot of time off, So we kind of took a long time off, by the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, I think we'd probably, maybe our relationship was at its least good by the end of the 80s. I think we had a year or so of kind of not really talking much, and we effectively split up, and then, we both went off and did different things. I got a band together with John Moss from Culture Club, and then I ended up doing other things like in A&R for Warner Brothers and for Sony. I worked on The Voice, Voice UK, the TV show. And Jack was doing his stuff with his jazz band and making other bits of music. But so in terms of being a very active sort of everyday working together type sort of unit, we stopped doing that, which is not to say that we weren't really good friends. I think we had that year of kind of not talking to each other, but soon that our relationship sort of got back on track. And then we collaborated, not directly through Wang Chung, but through other things. Like, for example, me working at Warner Brothers or at Sony, I'd bring Jack in to maybe produce some of the acts I was working with, or to co-write some stuff with people. So we were still, associating creatively, but not as Wang Chung the band. And so but then it was, I suppose, a bit later on, in around, I don't know, 2010 or something like that, or 11, that we got back on the horse much more. And we would occasionally, well, we'd always be offered tours and gigs and stuff, which I turned down because I was doing other things. But Jack did a couple of things. But then we got offered this show called Hit Me Baby One More Time. It was a big, I don't know if you remember it.
Yes.
On ABC, I think it was. A big, prime time show. And I thought, and I was really getting a bit sort of fed up with doing my A&R by then. And so we went off and we did that. And the response was so strong, so warm, and I think that made us think there's still something really fun about doing this. Maybe we should do a new record. So that's what we did. We made a new album of new material called Taser Up, and then we got back on the road, and that was the whole. So it was Wang Chung, back on the block, so to speak.
Yeah, my first introduction to you guys was in Richmond, Virginia in 1984 when you guys traveled with the Cars.
All right. Okay.
And I've told the story to Jack too, that you guys, Dance Hall Days was the first video I ever saw because we were poorer than dirt at home. But when I went to Richmond, Virginia with my aunt and uncle, they had MTV, and that's Dance Hall Days was the first video I watched on MTV. So my uncle came and said, hey, do you want to go to a concert? I'm 16 years old. And I said, yeah, what is it? He said, the Cars. And of course, you guys opened up for him, and I actually bought one of your guys' shirts rather than the Heartbeat City shirt from the Cars. My first introduction. But what's interesting though is 2 years later, my senior year in high school, now the statutes of limitations of probably won't get me prosecuted, but I had an English paper that I needed to do. And you know how you are as a kid, you procrastinate. And I finally looked down and looked at my albums, and I saw Points on the Curve, and I pulled out the jacket. Oh, vinyl was great with the jackets, and you had the lyrics were on them. So I did A True Love, and I wrote it down and I submitted it to the teacher, and you guys got an A+, by the way.
Ah, at last. That's really cool. I love things like that.
And I had to read it. I had to read it in front of the class, and I had to read it to the point where I almost wanted to start saying it because I love Points on the Curve, every album on Points on the Curve. But I just thought I'd let you know that, and I apologize for taking credit for your work.
That's totally fine, and that's great. I remember when we were on tour, I think it was with Tina Turner in 1987, doing a Norma Dome sort of type tour, and I remember something was sent backstage, like this big sort of envelope with this rather important looking document in, and I opened it up, and it was a fan who, for their sort of university kind of what's the word, one of the things they had to do for their university degree was to write. It was a comparative study of Let's Go by Wang Chung, John Donne's The Ecstasy, John Donne being an Elizabethan poet,
Right.
And what was it? And Higher Love by Stevie Winwood. And it was this incredibly intellectual sort of comparative study of those three songs. And I must say, it's incredibly pretentious, and most of it was probably load of rubbish, really. But I love the thinking behind it and the commitment to that sort of intellectual side of things. So, yeah, if you've got an A+ for True Love, that's fine with me.
Well, I was going to use Waves, but it had Make Love in there, and I didn't know how appreciative the teacher would have been if I'd have put some some niche stuff in there. Tell us, so you were talking about, do you guys still own your publishing rights? So all your music is still your music?
Well, we own these masters that we've done. So we actually, we still have an interest in the publishing, but How
does that work?
Well, we get a performance royalty and a writer's royalty. We did sell our publishing back catalogue about, how long ago was that? About 10 years ago. It was, we still, as I say, have a stake in it. So we get an override, we get a percentage, plus we still get our performance royalties, plus we own these masters of all our major songs. So all the revenue that they generate, we still get, we own them, so we get the majority of that. So our sort of royalty income is still pretty healthy. In fact, I'd say it's stronger than ever. It's amazing,
Did I see, and am I correct, that you found Adam and the Ants?
So did you want the whole story?
Yes, please.
So how far back shall I go? So I was in this band with John Moss and Pete, and how I learned to play, and it was all very, creative and stuff. And then it was sort of, we reached that point of, just pre-university. It's like, should I go to university or not? And as you can imagine, my parents were a bit worried that, if I wasn't going to go up that sensible road, and I was clearly plumping for, having these delusions, as far as they were concerned, of success in the music business. And they were really worried about that. And they were like, so they put quite a lot of pressure on me to take the sensible option and go to university. I was genuinely interested in psychology. I was reading books about Jung and Freud and stuff off my own bat. I was just genuinely interested. So it seemed, if I was going to go up this university road, that I would study something like psychology. So that's what in the end, I thought, well, I'll do it and see how I feel about it. So I went to university, Liverpool University, studied psychology and philosophy. I say studied, but actually I found it so disappointing, the course, and that I was more, as I always say, I think I studied alcoholology more than psychology. And in the end, I got thrown out, which was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it sort of forced me into what I really wanted to do, which was to be a musician and be in a band. And, I'd already sort of split up the band that I'd been in with John Moss and Pete and everything, so I could go to university. But when I came back down to London, having been thrown out of Liverpool University, with my parents deeply worried about me and not talking to me, or I wasn't talking to them, it was all really bad. And I thought, well, I better get myself a job, hopefully in the music industry, So I managed to lie my way into this job as a booker, a junior booker or agent at this small agency called Dick James Music, DJM. Dick James had actually signed the Beatles publishing back in the day. He was a legendary figure in it. But this little agency was a bit rubbish, really. It didn't have very good acts, So it was at that time that punk was just beginning to bubble up, and there was a really interesting scene in London. And I was young and really open-minded, and it really kind of fired me up. So I started to get gigs for, the frontline bands in this new scene. So I was getting bands like the Clash concerts for gigs for £10, and the Sex Pistols were rehearsing in a little dodgy basement across the road from the little office that I worked in, and it was I was right in the middle of it all. And I used to get gigs for the very beginning, the very early Adam and the Ants, when they were, someone called Jordan was hanging out with them and helping them out with, she had that sort of really spiky hair. So I used to get them gigs and stuff, and the band called The Only Ones, I sort of brought The Only Ones in, got them signed, and by the time that I'd left, I'd created really good relations with Adam and the Ants and the agency. So they got signed by the agency as well. By which time I had really had enough of doing all of that and thought it really was about time that I did what I truly wanted to do, instead of just helping other bands. I wanted to help me and follow my own sort of artistic kind of vocation. And that's when I got the band together, put this ad in Melody Maker for a guitar player, and luckily for me, found Jack, you know.
And I think Marco Polo and David Bowie are the only two people I saw play guitar with gloves on.
That's not an easy thing to do. That wasn't why I got them gigs, though. Okay.
So how did you master playing your instruments? What came easier, doing the bass, doing a guitar, doing the keyboards, and what kind of practice did you put into mastering those?
Well, I was a guitar player first and foremost. That bass came much later. I was completely obsessed with it. I just played it the whole time. I mean, I remember when I was still living at home, you know, I'd just be sitting on my bed playing the guitar, noodling away, you know, and all hours, you know, I just couldn't stop. You know, it's like it was sort of stuck to me, you know. And I was kind of good, you know, I developed pretty good technique. And I remember my sister, I used to have to call my sister because her room was next to mine. And I'd go, come in and take the guitar away from me, because I just couldn't put it down. So she used to have to come in and just take the guitar out of my hand so I could go to sleep, you know. So, yeah, a lot of perspiration and just genuine enthusiasm. And it was very kind of creative, what I was doing, I think, rather than, you know, I was never in a covers band. I never sort of spent a lot of time learning how to play existing songs. I was just wanted to write new stuff or sort of figure out interesting licks or progressions that I'd listen to, and just experiment with the kind of chord sequences that appealed to me, you know. So it was that was the sort of, the bass came later. That was when when was it? It was sort of, so we'd been in this band, me and Jack and Darren Costin, who was on Points on the Curve, and Lee Gorman on bass, who went on to form Bow Wow Wow, and Glenn Gregory on vocals. He went on to form Heaven 17. So we were in this band called 57 Men. And we kind of sounded like 57 Men. Lots of really good ideas, and it was again, pretty creative, but it was a bit too much, really. It didn't quite work. But so Jack and me and Darren sort of seemed to be the creative nucleus of what we were doing. We wanted to simplify the sound, needed a bass player. So it was like, well, do you fancy playing bass? Who fancies playing bass? Okay, I'll play bass, and that was how it all that was how I moved over to bass, and I really enjoyed it. It was a whole different thing, you know.
What's the perfect atmosphere to write music?
The perfect atmosphere. It's, you know, that obviously you don't want distractions if you can avoid them, but having said that, music comes out in all different ways, and it's not easy to sort of predict, you know. So, you know, you can be feeling exhausted and in a bad mood or something, and then you sit down and suddenly something just comes out and it's great. Or you could be feeling all sort of fired up and perfect conditions, everything's great, and then you just run into a kind of bit of a brick wall. And you know, you can work really hard on something, trying to shape it into something you really want it to, put it into a sort of direction you want it to go in, but it just won't respond. You know, it's got a life of its own. So there's no rules. Sometimes I'll mess around on the guitar and something will come. Sometimes I'll mess around on the piano. In fact, I seem to be mostly in that mode these days. So messing around on the piano, or other times I'll just play around with got this sort of keyboard with drum patterns in it and different sounds, and something might just come out of that, and it'll trigger me into going up a certain road. It can be anything, you know.
You know, I was chatting with a couple of my friends before I let them know that I was doing this interview, and we got into a conversation about if someone would have asked me when I was listening to your guys' music in the '80s, um, what kind of music do you like? I would have said you guys are rock and roll. Do you have a definition between pop and rock and roll?
Well, I mean, these days pop means something else, doesn't it? I mean, I don't care about it if that's what you're asking. It doesn't bother me what it is. Um, if it feels good and it's sort of creatively sort of satisfying, then I don't really think about categories particularly. Possibly in the past, I might have done that occasionally. But I find if you overthink things like that, then it can lead you into trouble really creatively. I think you just got to let it come out, and then you can sort of let it come out and play with it, and then maybe shape it a bit later. Once the sort of that creative explosion hopefully has happened. Do you know what I mean? And not be too sort of over calculating about it. That's my experience. I mean, I quite like to have a lyrical line, for example, as a start point. But even that, I'm being less strict about, you know. So I'm trying to be as open as possible these days, and let things come from wherever they come from, you know.
You know, you made a comment of, you know, going to school and you know, you talked about alcohol. Once you guys start getting on the path and you know, your popularity becomes, you become more popular. What keeps you from going down the path of a Jimi Hendrix or Jim Morrison? You know, is it a gene that you think rock and roll stars have, that they were going to be alcoholics or drug addicts from the beginning, even though with the success that they had within music? Or how hard was it to stay away from it? Was it always in your face? I mean, how did you push it away and not have issues or problems?
Uh, Look, when you're on tour, especially when you're a bit younger, you're living in a slightly artificial environment. So, and people are, hopefully, you know, things are going well enough. You're getting sort of quite high levels of adulation. You're on the move all the time. It's almost your job to kind of show off a little bit, you know. Plus, of course, you're expressing yourself creatively, and hopefully, you know, sometimes it becomes a bit of a job, but usually the adrenaline levels are pretty high. So when you come off stage, you're pretty high, you know, you're pretty hyped up. It takes quite a while to sort of calm the system down. So in that state of highness, you know, you're maybe there are temptations, maybe you want to keep the high up, or you're going to hang out or do all sorts of stuff. So I could see how people can get into trouble with it. And of course that compounds every day, and then you end up a bit of a mess, you know. Plus, you know, you go through all different sorts of psychological. I remember back in the 80s that the last tour that we did, the one, it was on and off. It went on for months and months and months across the US and around the world, actually. And I remember the first half of it, I was sort of trying to control things quite a lot and becoming almost quite miserable. You know, I wanted to be back in London, being creative, writing stuff, being in the studio. That's what I was more interested in at that time. So in trying to fight at the way things were going, I became pretty miserable, actually. So the first half of those 6 months on the road, I don't look back with any great deal of affection. And I remember sort of reaching this point of like, you're going to have to go with the flow, or just forget it. You know what I mean? So I went to the other extreme and became sort of this rock and roll idiot, and was, doing what I felt was what you had to do, and which was actually quite a lot of fun, but I ended up being really, really ill, So I paid a big price, and I came back from that tour actually really ill. I was ill for nearly a year, so it's something I'll never forget that, and I think as you grow older, you kind of learn how to maybe regulate yourself a bit better, to leave enough open to let the sort of creative juices flow and to let the adrenaline flow, but not to be so sort of reckless as to make yourself really ill and to become a bit of an asshole.
How, when you guys would tour and you would come out on stage, did you ever have a little stage fright? Was there ever a routine that you would go through before you go out on stage, or was there things that you would think about once you got on stage, or what you focused on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to have a little bit of stage fright, up to a point. You don't want to be paralyzed. Yeah, you don't want to have it so much that you're like a rabbit caught in a headlamps, But a little bit of nerves, I think, is quite a good thing. It's a good motivator. I think the worst thing you can be is complacent. So to walk on stage knowing that it's going to be a cakewalk, I think that doesn't lead to good work. In fact, that doesn't lead to good work anywhere. Whether you're sitting at home writing a song, or whether you're walking out in front of thousands of people, and expecting them to love you. So a little bit of stage fright, yes. And some gigs I had a lot of stage fright, And I remember like doing some TV shows. I remember we played some huge shows. You were just talking about, American Bandstand, I think, and we did. Remember playing Joan Rivers' show, I think it was. And we were going to play live on the show, and then be interviewed. And I was getting really nervous about that. And I remember we were in the green room, and there's all sorts of people like Charlton Heston and some huge stars sort of hanging around with us in the backstage. And I remember drinking a bit of whiskey just to give myself. And then I had to go to the loo, and I realised, can I swear?
You're good.
I thought, Jesus, I am completely out of my head. I was completely drunk. I didn't realise. I thought, how the hell am I going to get through this? And I was really nervous about the talking bit afterwards. And Jack was really nervous about the vocal bit, singing the song, and especially the middle eight of Everybody Have Fun Tonight, which is really high. He was worried he was going to mess that up on live TV in front of millions of people. Well, we got through it fine, I suppose, I don't know if you can find it anywhere, but, I remember we played the song, and I forgot to take my bass off and unplug it as we walked over to the chairs to be interviewed. And I was just about, my lead was just about to get so tight that the whole amp would have fallen over. And Joan River just rushed out and stopped, saved me, This is all on camera, And so that's how I wasn't quite myself, sort of, shall we say. And I was a bit nervous. So that little anecdote for you.
Well, what's it like, as a rock star, how, or does somebody else choose your clothing or jewelry, accessories, your hair? How all is that? I mean, is it all ego, or is it all does someone help you, or do you walk through a store and go, man, I think I'm going to wear that jacket on tomorrow night's show?
Well, of course, and especially in the 80s, not now, but in the 80s, that we went through various phases of, people having to work with stylists, and that you can see in some instances that seriously went wrong, you're supposed to be dealing with some expert who knows how you're supposed to look and how it's all going to be great. And you end up just looking like a complete idiot, And there's quite a few, unfortunately, more than enough examples of us not looking great. But I think over the years we kind of figured that one out and got on top of it. So we would do what we wanted to do. But as I say, there's plenty of disasters for everyone still to see, unfortunately. You can't do anything about that. But these days, no, I would never have anyone do that for me.
What was the video making process like? Was it a pain in the butt? Was it fun to do? And also, did you get kind of a kick seeing yourself on a video? Was that's got to be pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously were trying to do something a bit more. MTV, we were very lucky. That wave was coming in, and it particularly favoured sort of bands from the UK who were trying to do something a bit more interesting than I think the American bands in the early days of MTV. So we would be more ambitious to do something a bit more maybe eccentric or quirky or something a bit different. On the other hand, we were still very much reliant on the director's vision of it. They would have the idea, generally speaking. So sometimes we'd kind of end up with doing something really good, and sometimes we wouldn't. The actual process was, I found, actually quite at times quite boring. Because there's a hell of a lot of hanging around for the shot to get set up, and you're not as in control as you would be, if you're making your own record. We knew, working with music, we knew the tools, we knew what we wanted. We were much more hands-on. With video, especially at that time, I think we were much more dependent on the kind of the genius that was directing us. So kind of mixed feelings, really. But yes, it's exciting, the fact that there'd be a whole production around something that we'd written that had started off in our little front room somewhere as an musical idea and end up on this set in Los Angeles or something, so that was kind of cool. But I think the other thing for me was that because Jack did more of the lead vocals, so inevitably he'd be the busier of the two of us doing the videos, do you know what I mean? Making shooting all the shots. So I'd be hanging around even more, and we'd always have really early calls, like always be 5 or 6 a.m. for the first call. And then sometimes I'd be waiting, a long time before I was actually needed. And after a while I learned that was not something I was particularly happy about. And I just used to say, look, when you really need me, please don't ask me to get there at 6 a.m. But I do remember, I think the last straw was when we did the Don't Be My Enemy video. And, I had the usual 6 a.m. call. By the time I was actually required for my first shot, was more like sort of, after about 8 hours of hanging around. That's what I remember. So 8 hours of hanging around, having got up really early. I was wearing this white suit, and waiting for 8 hours, white suit, looking really kind of good, made up, everything was perfect. And then it was like, okay, Nick, you're on, so I had this cup of tea, and I put the tea down to do my first shot. And there was some bizarre kind of gravitational anomaly happen. As I put the cup down, all the tea came up out of the cup and covered my white suit, just as I was about to, after 8 hours of waiting. So then we had another hour of sort of hair dryers and all sorts of expert fixing it. But, so that was probably the last time I agreed to come unnecessarily early, But overall, yeah, of course, it was lovely to see our music, playing on MTV and stuff,
What were the pros and cons, or what are the pros and cons of your interactions with your fans?
Actually, most very, very largely pros. I think these days it's much easier to get a sense of what they think about things, which is lovely, for us. because I think back in the day, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't Zoom, there wasn't. So it would be, people would have to write letters, or there were lots of gatekeepers protecting us, you know, from, and security people at the shows. It was much more difficult to get a real direct sort of feedback from the audience. I mean, yes, of course there were people, but these days it's lovely. Because we're a bit older, and so you really appreciate the fact that people still, you know, it means something to people, that your music, you know, it's a really lovely feeling. I feel very privileged and honoured that, you know, that when people tell us, you know, what it means to them, they'll associate our music with experiences they had when they were younger, or maybe their kids like it now, or when they saw a movie they didn't realise that was this, and it's a lovely thing, you know. And I think the internet and the way we gig these days, and we'll meet the audience and those that want to come and, you know, buy merch of us, or get signed, or just, you know, have their pictures taken, or whatever they want, you know. And they'll tell us what they feel. It's so 99% lovely. And especially after all these years, to know that it still means something to them. It's lovely for us.
Do you still enjoy touring?
Love it. I think, you know, I told you that story about, you know, how the last big tour we did in the 80s was, the first half of it, I was really quite miserable. And then the second half, I sort of went to the other extreme. I think now I love it much more than I used to. I think I'm much more in touch with who I am, you know. I mean that as a person, you know. I don't mean, hey, I'm Nick from Wang Chung, you know. And, you know, we try and do a good show. We take it seriously, but we also, I think, when you're a bit older, maybe you can know how to have fun, you know, with it as well. You're confident enough to maybe be a bit looser, almost, you know, in a good way. So, plus all the interaction with the fans and the feedback, I'd absolutely love it. And I've really missed it this year, not being able to. Well, these last few months, we did manage to do a few gigs at the beginning of the year, but obviously the pandemic has stopped everything else since. But so I miss that. But we'll be back on the horse. We'll get back on the horse, and we'll do it again, hopefully.
Who in your career have you enjoyed meeting because of the success that you've had in music, or you wouldn't have met if you would not have been a musician? But you're like, wow. Do you have wow moments of some people that you have met, besides of how successful you and Jack have been with Wang Chung? But do you have wow moments in your career?
Well, plenty of those, yeah. Because, you know, I still, obviously, to some people, we're quite sort of, you know, we mean quite a lot to some people, but we're still, I just think I'm just little old me, you know. And I very much have wow moments. I can give you 3 examples, and there's loads more. So okay. I think the first one was when we recorded maybe you've heard this story, but when we recorded Dance Hall Days at Abbey Road Studios back in 1983. So, you know, Jack and I are massive Beatles fans and still are. So just to be at Abbey Road Studios alone was amazing for us. And it was in the days before it was all refurbished. So it still had that old sort of feel to the place, which for us was brilliant. And the desk was still very old-fashioned desk with great big knobs and up and over faders and things. So to be recording on equipment like that in Studio 2, that big famous room, you know, with the tiles falling off the walls, it was all a bit grubby and just perfect, you know, for us. And, you know, we recorded Dance All Days and the whole Points in the Curve album. But Dance All Days was clearly going to be the big single. And the bass just wasn't sounding quite right on the recording. and I'm left-handed bass player, and so the engineer goes, "Oh, hang on, I've got an idea. I'm going to get another instrument for you. See if that'll sound any better." So he disappears. About 15 minutes later, this guy walks in, holding a left-handed Yamaha bass, and he goes, "I'm from the bass hire company." And we looked at him. It was Paul McCartney with his bass, and but so basically he lent me his bass to play on Dance All Day. That's the bass that you hear on Dance All Days, and it's just one of those moments. We were literally kind of speechless, because he's an absolute hero. I told you we loved the Beatles. So that was an amazing experience. What else? I mean, William Friedkin, the film director who directed, French Connection and The Exorcist, and we were an amazing man, and he approached Wang Chung to do the score for To Live and Die in LA out the blue, and it was a wonderful. And still is. We met him again. We meet him regularly. He's been a wonderful friend. We saw him a few months ago in London. We did this Q&A at the famous cinema with William Friedkin and us, about To Live and Die in LA. It was wonderful. So yeah, I always feel a bit kind of in awe of him. He's done some amazing stuff. And then the other hero that I have is Frank Zappa. Well, Frank Zappa, his keyboard player was Peter Wolf. Peter Wolf produced. But the reason we got Peter Wolf to work with us on the Mosaic album was partly because of his history of being in Frank Zappa's band. That to me was like an amazing credential, and I actually got invited over to have a jam. But Gail Zappa invited me over to jam with Frank Zappa, and I wimped out of it. I was so in awe that I wimped out and I didn't go. Can you believe it?
It's interesting. I tried to do 6 Degrees of Separation on all my shows, and William Friedkin also did the movie Blue Chips, which is a basketball movie. So
right.
We've got the basketball connection right there. So that's what's funny. What's funny today was my wife asked me who I was having on. About 6 months ago, we were driving the car and I was listening to "Look at Me Now" off of Points on the Curve, and she's a little bit older than I. So she said that may be the dumbest song I've ever heard in my life. So today she asked me she said, "So who are you interviewing?" I said, "Nick Feldman, the other part of Wang Chung," and she's like, "Oh, okay, it's cool." And so I heard her in the kitchen humming Dance Hall Days. So I just wanted to tell you that I don't know if it's something that I've got that I can work her to come over to my side, but she was humming Dance Hall Days while preparing dinner for this evening.
It's about time.
So
now
Nick, where wangchung.com, right?
Yeah.
People can get t-shirts and
get everything, and also you can get. We're on Facebook as well. Wang Chung the band, Wang Chung band, or always forget what it is. And with some reason we've got a friends page as well. So, but yeah, so we're everywhere. Yeah.
What does Nick Feldman do? What is the life of a rock star today? What take us through a daily Nick Feldman day?
Wow. I mean, it varies really. We'll have sort of periods of intense activity with Wang Chung, for example, like we've just done this Back to the Basement thing, the online virtual concert. We did days and days and days of interviews and promo for that. We re-recorded Everybody Have Fun Tonight to Everybody Stay Safe Tonight. We did the video to it. We also did some sort of acoustic stuff, me and Jack, and Ed edited that all together. that was all very intensive Wang Chungery, you know, over a few weeks of work, you know. But then other days it'll be quite, you know, quite domestic stuff, or incredibly boring stuff like getting my taxes sorted out and my accounts, which I hate doing, but I seem to be doing that all the time, which drives me mad. And then I'll sort of drift into this room I'm in now, which is our front room. There's a piano here, so I'll mess around on that. Sometimes for hours, sometimes not, depending how things are going. Hang out with the kids. I mean, obviously, you know, go for a walk, you know, or ride a bike, try and keep fit, trying to avoid catching this horrible virus, that kind of stuff, you know. Go shopping, you know, stuff everyone does, you know. To be honest, I've sort of quite enjoyed the relative peace and quiet of the lockdown we've had. I mean, obviously it's a tragedy what's happened, and so many people have passed on, and it's just appalling. So I'm not trying to be stupid about it. But my sort of the day-to-day life has been rather pleasantly sort of quiet, yeah. And I found that rather creative, actually, to be honest. And it's opened up, I feel I've got some really good stuff as a result of it, music stuff, you know. So overall good, you know, but we're coming out of lockdown now, so I don't know, it's making me a bit nervous. So I don't know how to feel about it.
Nick Feldman, I ran long on the show. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you answering my questions. This is going to be very enjoyable for those who watch and listen. This will be a video and also will be an audio podcast also. But I thank you so much for your time, guys. Everyone be safe tonight. Go to iTunes, buy it today. You can also watch the video on YouTube. But Nick Feldman of Wang Chung, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Good to talk to you.